Hi everyone, we're here today with a very good friend and colleague of ours, Mary Franklin Smith. I'm just going to give a little introduction to Mary and then she's going to talk to us. So Mary's a psychological therapist with over 15 years experience in specialist NHS mental health services, and now she's running her own practice called Light of Mind. And we would love you to tell us about Light of Mind, Mary.
Hi both. Thanks so much for inviting me. How exciting.
I know.
So Light of Mind is a little practice that I run where I do one-to-one therapy, group therapy and training events. I still work in the NHS part-time in an eating disorder service called Connect. And I sort of joining you today from my sort of Light of Mind, one of my Light of Mind days. And essentially it's a practice that I set up so that I could share what I see to be useful with people who have eating disorders, or who perhaps don't have that diagnosis as well. So essentially any human who wants to experience their own mental health.
Thank you. And so a few years ago, Mary and I had a conversation, and she said something to me that really kind of struck a chord and kind of triggered my kind of true recovery. At that point, I was kind of in recovery, but I still had all the kind of the habits, beliefs that I had while I was still suffering. And it was about my blacklist, which was my list of kind of fear foods at the time. And Mary kind of just called me out on it. And I think Mum was on the call as well and was a bit kind of horrified at the time that someone was being so direct. But Mary said something along the lines of, you know, it's not real, or something like that. And that really kind of simple few words just started to kind of unravel so many of the kind of the beliefs and stories that I held at that time, including my blacklist. So Mary, that was obviously, we've talked about this since then, but I just wondered if you can maybe say something about what made you say that to me.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose what comes to mind as I'm listening to you talk, B, is that I wasn't scared to speak to you. I wasn't walking on eggshells around you, and I wasn't scared to speak to your health and say something that in my head, as you were talking about this, what seemed very real blacklist to you, I was thinking, but that's not real. That's not, that she's made that up and she thinks it's real. So I suppose the first answer to that question is, what made me say that to you is it seemed like an obvious thing to say to me, and I wasn't scared to say it. And I wasn't scared to say it because I know that I knew then, and I know now that you and everyone else that we meet has an awful lot more resilience and health than we perhaps can see when somebody's struggling with an eating disorder. And I think that's the thing. It's like one of the functions of an eating disorder can be to communicate distress, right? And one of the things that I've certainly learned over the years that I've been working in a specialist eating disorder service is that there's different reasons that people develop an eating disorder. One of them can be to communicate distress. One of them can be to have a sense of control. One of them can be to sort of numb feelings that feel too overwhelming. One of them can be to feel special and feel like you're good at something that perhaps when you weren't feeling like you were good at something. So depending on the person and their own individual story, everybody's got their own reason that this started and is carrying on. And beneath that reason, there is an intuitive mind, and there is an awful lot of common sense in everybody. But people can't necessarily see that when someone's right in the midst of an eating disorder, and I include myself in that. There have been times when I've worked with people who look so unwell and physically are really unwell, and are really experiencing an awful lot of mental distress. So it can be hard to sort of think, is it all right for me to say that? Is it okay for me to say something that's, as you said, be really direct? Because what if they're not okay with that, and what if that really upsets them, or what if it makes it worse? And my experience of working with carers is that's exactly what goes on, is that people think, well, I better not say that because I don't want to make it worse. And I suppose for me as a therapist, it's very much about seeing that so long as that is said, like when I said it to you, I hope you, whilst it also felt direct, it also felt loving. I don't know if it did, because you can only say things like that when you have a relationship with somebody and they trust you. So I wouldn't just walk into a room with someone who was really suffering with an eating disorder and say, "What? That's not real. What are you doing that for?" Because I know that it looks real, and I, of course, as a human being, also know that when my thoughts and beliefs and rules look real, then they look real. End of. But it's knowing that they're not, and knowing that you can tolerate a person saying that because deeply you know that that's true too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so from your perspective as a therapist, what would you kind of, I guess, how do you kind of talk to your patients and clients to help when things do look really real to them? How do you kind of start to help people see, and those who are watching and listening to this, how can you kind of help them to see that actually not everything that they're thinking right now is real?
Yeah. So I would normally start that in two ways. Firstly, give some little examples of things that we can both in the room acknowledge that we think that aren't real, or that we shouldn't necessarily believe or follow. Something like, I give the example of when I last got onto an aeroplane and we were sitting there and everyone's putting their bags up and everything. And I'm sitting there in the business of this aeroplane having the thought, I wonder what would happen if when in flight I put my hand through that window. I wonder if you can even break the glass in an airplane window. And if you do, I wonder if we'd all been sucked out, or whether it would just be me that'd be sucked out. And I'm sitting there having this fantasy in my head, and my husband's like, "You're right. Can you give us a hand with the bags?" I'm like, "Oh yes, sorry." So something like that, where we can go, "Oh, I had this thought," because we all experience thoughts like that come into our head that would be dangerous if we followed them, but we know not to. So that's the first thing I would do, is sort of just bring into the conversation that that's what happens for humans, that we all have thoughts that would be dangerous, would be cruel, would be unkind, would be fearsome if we followed them, and we know not to. So that's the first thing. And then talk about the fact that for all humans, thought creates reality. So whatever it is that we're thinking, we will see the world through that lens, because that's what it's like to be humans. The best special effects in system in the universe, which I'm sure you guys have talked about a lot on your channel. So it's A, we all have thoughts that come into our head uninvited. B, when we have a thought, it can look real, and we feel our thinking. We actually feel our thinking in our bodies. All of us. So there's nothing wrong with you that you're having a thought and you're believing it and you're feeling all this feeling. That's just what it's like to be human. So those are the first two things that I would do. And then we would gently sort of go, okay, so now let's look at what thoughts and beliefs you've got. And let's look at why it is that looks so real to you. Because there'll be a reason. There's always a reason. And a person might feel really embarrassed of the reason, but there will be a reason that you're believing it. At some point, it will have come into your head on one day, and it will have looked absolutely real, and you'd have followed it. And then because it worked for you, or because it helped in some way, you will have gone on to do it again, whatever that is. And then you would have looked for evidence that was the truth, and you'll find it. You'll find that evidence, because whatever we look for, we find. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And what impact do you see this having with your patients and clients, particularly because obviously when I was going through therapy and going to doctors and all of that, this wasn't the approach that was taken. This is only something that I've kind of come across in the last few years since that conversation.
Yeah.
So what impact and what difference, I guess, do you see this approach having with the people that you work with?
It depends on the person, and it depends on how open somebody is.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, when you start sharing the principles, everything becomes clear and you just let go of your old beliefs, like you did, like you were ready to do that, and you absolutely saw it as an option. I think that's more to the point. You just saw it as an option, and you felt able to take that step. So the impact that I see is completely different depending on the person. But what I do think is a constant is that I no longer think it's my job to fix everybody. I no longer think it's my job to make people see something or feel something. I know that they have access to their own light, which is why I call my business Light of Mind. Like it's the light of their mind that they're seeking, not mine. And when it's right for them to step into that light and follow it, then they will find their way out. And so, and I know that is true. I don't know that everybody will do that, but I know that everybody can do that. And so it gives me, it takes a light off, it takes a weight off my shoulders. When I meet somebody, I can see, whilst I might not physically be able to see their health, I know that it's there so that I can talk to that. And I would say that most of the time, the kinds of feedback that I get from people is stuff like you said, I can't believe you said that to me, but it made perfect sense. That feels clearer, that I don't feel so confused. And I can feel that you don't think I'm broken and that this isn't hopeless. So that's a very general sort of feedback that I get from people. And also sometimes people feel really frustrated with that because an eating disorder is serving a function, you know, and it can be super, super hard to let that go if you don't see that there's an option. So one of the things that I often do is I'll say, I want to grab, just bear with me 1 second, it's worth it, hang on a second. So I might say to someone, okay, which of these, so like I'll can you see me? Like I'll say, which of these 2 objects do you want? Do you want the one in my right hand or do you want the one in my left hand? Which of these 2 objects do you want? And if I said that to you, what would you say?
Where's the other one?
And then I just keep saying, well, which of these 2 objects do you want? And you're like, well, there isn't another one. Until you see that there is 2 things to choose from, you aren't going to choose. Yeah. It won't look like a choice. Mm-hmm. So to me, the work is helping someone see that there is a way out. They do have a choice, and being with them in loving compassion until they see that. Yeah. And all the time I can see that. Does this make sense? So yeah, so I'm not going, oh God, actually maybe maybe you can't recover, maybe there isn't hope for you. How on earth will that help? So that's a really huge thing to say. So what I'm saying is that every time I'm with anybody, I can see 2 objects, I can see 2 ways, 2 options, and then it's just my job to sit with them if they want to and connect with them and show love to them until it presents itself to them.
That, Mary, that's such a great example. And one of the things that's coming up for me a lot is what and you've mentioned it already, that we all talk about, do you see their health? Yeah. And I think that's certainly something that we found when we work with our clients, is that we see their health even though they don't see it right now. But what I'm interested in as well is, from a carer's perspective, is how useful is it for a carer to see not only the health in their loved one, but also their own health as well?
It's beyond helpful, because it's so much easier to almost do something to someone else, isn't it? We all find it easier to give advice than to take it. And I imagine that everyone who's listening to this clip will be able to, on some level, recognize that. You can see, when your friend comes to you with a problem, whatever that is, you can see, well, it's obvious what they should do. Doesn't look so obvious to your friend. When your loved one is sitting there struggling with their meal or restricting or binging or purging, whatever it is, it looks obvious to you what they should do or not do. Doesn't look so obvious to them. And then it can become like you're trying to do something to somebody because of your own fear and your own worry, absolutely understandable fear and worry for your loved one. But that's what they'll feel from you. Because we can feel stuff in our bodies that we can't always intellectually understand. So I think that this idea of not, you can't give away what you don't have. You can't pour from an empty cup. It really just becomes about you having to, as the carer, see your own health and see your own way forward. And it not being, and this is a massive thing to say, huge in fact, even I'm nervous about saying this one, and it not being dependent on them. So your health not being dependent on them being okay. That you are, and that's huge. And I've got 3 children and I want to sort of call that out. Like when you're sitting with a calm, still mind from a loving, accepting place, your way of showing up with your loved one will just be hugely different. If you've got everything hanging on their recovery, the pressure that they will feel will be enormous. And that sounds very direct.
And as you're saying that, I remember as clear as day an event, however many years ago now, where I just remember saying to B, I can't make you better. Yeah. And then just kind of leaving the room, going up to my bedroom and sobbing my heart out into my pillow so nobody else would hear. But it wasn't down to me to do that.
Yeah.
And that was way before, I was just training as a coach at the time. So that was way before we came across this understanding that we share. But there was something that I knew inside me that it wasn't my job to fix her. And that she needed to find it within herself to do that. And as you say, with your, I had 3 and husband and everything else to be looking after as well. And it's one of those things, isn't it? Because it's like, as you said, one of the things maybe that brings an eating disorder on is about this need to feel special or to feel, whatever that is. But it was that fine line between, does B now think that I don't care? But it wasn't, and again, that's me then getting caught up in my thinking about that.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things as well is and that conversation, I remember it so clearly, that conversation that we had a couple of years ago, my heart was pounding because it was like, oh my God, Mary said the thing. Yeah. And feeling that gosh, how I wish I could have said that. How I wish I could have been as direct as that, lovingly direct, but the eggshells that I was walking on, you had no idea about.
Yeah.
Because you weren't on them. And I'm grateful to this day for that conversation. At the time, I think I was like, oh.
Yeah.
But it is, and it's one of the things, and I remember being on a call with a client the other day who's poorly, very poorly. And I just said to her as we left the call, I said, you do know that I see that you're beneath all of this, beneath the behaviors, I see your health. Mm-hmm. And there was something in the way that, and she took that on as almost like, well, maybe if Rebecca sees it, then maybe I can begin to see it.
Maybe it's possible. Yeah, sure. And I think there's something about if you get into battle with a person's anorexic identity, then almost let's use you two as a beautiful example. Like when B was right in the throes of anorexia, you perhaps would sometimes have fallouts about food, maybe. That wouldn't be uncommon. And then it's almost like when that's happening and you're embodying the kind of, come on, what are you doing? Then it's almost like that internal battle that people experience when they have an eating disorder. Can I have that? No, I shouldn't have that. Do I deserve that? No, I don't. Have I earned enough? Becomes externalized with the loved one.
Yeah.
so that it's almost like then the person who's suffering can sit fully comfortably in the eating disorder identity. You're holding the space of the rational mind, if you like, and then there's this ping pong. As soon as you take yourself away from that position as a carer and sort of come alongside them and go, goodness, I can really hear the battle, in whatever words make sense to you, then there's a different quality to the relationship, because you're not taking the role of, you know, terrier, as Janet Treasure would call it, in her wonderful book about carers. Yeah,
in fact, we'll put a link to that below the video, because it's such a brilliant book. Really helped me, all those animal metaphors.
I bet.
Mary, I wanted to ask you mentioned something about the kind of anorexic identity. And identity is something that I have kind of talked a lot about, but because it was such a huge thing for me, that anorexia kind of was my identity for all those years, and I've talked about it. And one thing that we've talked to people about is about kind of what's been kind of brought up, is that when that kind of anorexic identity goes, what's left, and actually the fear around that, and kind of questions around, well, how can I trust the other elements of my identity, because I haven't seen them for so long. And I wondered if you could maybe kind of just say a little bit about that, around identity and your kind of reflections.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I guess it depends on where you're coming in. So I see this as like a set of steps. Depends where you're coming in here on the staircase when we're talking about identity, because oftentimes people will, you know, think about identity as, you know, the things that I do, the way that the relationships that I've got, my hobbies, my interests, my career, my college, my relationships, my beliefs. And absolutely, there's no question that any eating disorder can feel to have completely taken over all of that, so that you do feel completely isolated, and people always, every day, say to me they feel isolated, they feel that they haven't got anything else that they're good at, so that for God's sake they can't let go of this, because then who would they be? And those are really important conversations. And one of the quotes that comes to mind is from someone who recovered, was, I found something that was more important to me than my anorexia, whatever that might be. But I often use this metaphor. So bear with me, because it's a little bit of a long one, but I think it's going to answer the question from my perspective anyway. So if you imagine a beach, and you imagine that imagine yourself on a beach, and imagine that you are building sandcastles. And you build this beautiful sandcastle. There's lots of turrets, and there's you know, you've built little moats, and you've even put little flags in and shells, and you've decorated the windows, and you're really proud of the sandcastle. And people start taking photos of your sandcastle, putting them on social media. Everyone's like around your sandcastle. You're loving your sandcastle. And then after a while, the sea, because you're on a beach, comes in and knocks over one of your turrets, and you see the flags floating on top of the water. And then it knocks over another turret, and you're there and you're bereft, because it's your sandcastle, you spent a lot of time on it. And then you look down and you see, after you've spent some time being upset about your sandcastle, you look down and you see that you still have the bucket and you still have the spade. And you think, oh, I'll build another sandcastle. And then the sea knocks that one down. And then you build another sandcastle, and then a wave comes in for that one, or a bird comes and nicks something. And it becomes fun, because you're building all these sandcastles, because you know that you have a bucket and spade. So I see an eating disorder a bit like a sandcastle that you've spent a lot of time perfecting. And and because you're always fighting against the tide of your body, because your body is always motivated to change, that's another point, you'll always be fighting against that. So a bit like the tide, you can't stop the tide from coming in and getting one of your sandcastles. So, but when you see that you can build something else, and you can build something else, and you can build something else, because you're the one that's got the bucket and spade, then it becomes possible for you to go, okay, well, I can let go of my eating disorder because I can build something else. Now you could say because you're the one with the bucket and spade, or you could say because you're the sand.
Yes.
because actually you are this being that is aware, that is conscious, that has thoughts, that has an imagination, that dreams. And when, as you, just in the same way as you kind of brought this thought to life, which was your eating disorder, so too can you absolutely, of course, bring something else to life, because you are the sand. We all are.
Yeah, I love that. And
Yes.
and actually it was something that I was saying the other day, that actually if you're able to kind of trust in this anorexic identity and really believe in that, then that's made out of the exact same stuff as anything else that you can create. So why not? Nothing. What's stopping you from actually believing, trusting in that different identity just as much?
Well, what's stopping, I would argue, is because it's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
And what you know about this sandcastle, yeah, it's not perfect, but you know it. You spent a lot of time there. You know, you get some of your needs met. You do. And it's, yes, it's painful, and yes, it's traumatic, and yes, it's awful, and yes, it makes you feel terribly physically as well, but it's, you know it. And we as humans like things that are familiar, whatever that is. It's incredible what we get used to. So I suppose that's that idea of you being the sand is you really deeply seeing that you are conscious awareness, that we all are aware. We're always aware. That's the only constant. And I prefer to go in that direction with identity, as well as, or under, beneath, or deeply, as well as this idea of, well, you can, if you let go of that sandcastle, you can build that sandcastle. Because what if that other sandcastle, people say to me, well, if I let go of my anorexia because I want to go back to university, or because I want that job, what if I lose that job? What if I get kicked out of uni? What if that relationship breaks down? And that's when you often find people talking about this idea of relapse.
And that's it. We talk about going upstream, don't we, such a lot? And that's exactly the same thing that Mary's talking about, which is that we are the sand. Yeah.
And I was going to ask one maybe last question around, you just kind of talked about relapse, and that's something that is obviously talked a huge amount about, and it's something that is feared. And I certainly felt that I had to kind of fight really, really hard and work really, really hard to prevent that from happening. And I wondered whether, from your perspective of working with patients and clients, what you've seen in relation to that, and how you help them to maybe see something differently around that.
So I think it's really natural and normal, for want of a better word, for human beings to sort of be black or white about things. So it might be that you're, let's take it out of eating disorders for a minute, and say you want to, I don't know, give up smoking. And you've done really well at giving up smoking for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, and then you have a blip, you have a fag. And it's really normal to hear people go, oh, well, I've had a fag, I might as well just carry on for the rest of the day. We put these little time frames on it, and then I'll start again on Monday, or the biggest one in our culture is, well, on New Year, in the new year I'll do this. So I suppose it's two things. It's seeing that it's really deeply understanding what's going on for you, really getting to know yourself and understanding that, oh, okay, so what's happened there, if I've relapsed, is I've forgotten that I'm the sand. I've forgotten in this moment that that I'm telling myself a story that I won't be loved if I let go of this eating disorder, or that I won't be able to communicate how I feel, or my distress. And my brain slipped back into an old pathway, and that's okay, because that's what happens for all humans. That doesn't mean that I've failed. Doesn't mean that I've got to, do some sort of, ritual or mantra, or I've just slipped back into an old pathway because I've forgotten who and what I truly am, and I've forgotten that I was born good enough, and that I am already unique and special, and this wonderful, loving being. I've forgotten that. And I've forgotten that because we all forget things, especially when we've been doing them for a while, if we haven't been doing them for a long time. And then if we can return a sort of compassionate and loving response to ourselves when we've had a day where we've gone back into old behaviours, and we can really understand that, then we're more likely to, I don't know, find our way back to the place that we want to be or were before. If our response is, oh my goodness, I've messed it up, I've gone backwards, like, we don't go backwards, there's no such thing. You know, this idea that life is like this journey from birth all the way through like that, all the way through to death. And then if I mess up, I go back on my line. No, life is this, Giles Croft gave me this link, you know, life, who got it from somewhere else. Life is a dance. We're dancing around the floor here. You know, and then I'm not doing this dance to get to the end of the dance. I'm not listening to a piece of music to get to the end of the piece of music. I'm in this movement. I'm all over the place. So I've danced back over here. Oh, I remember this bit of the dance floor. I don't need to go here. But it's okay that I did. I forgot. And I'm going to dance here. As opposed to this critical voice that comes in like, what is wrong with me? I've messed up. Now I've lost. And it's that keeps a relapse going. Now I've lost it. Now I've forgotten it. No, just in this moment.
That's so beautiful, Mary. Absolutely, I love that idea of the dance.
And that's really helpful. And it kind of brings back what we talked about a little while ago, which was that just because I'm thinking about food, that doesn't mean I've suddenly got anorexia again. And actually, we had a moment where we had gone food shopping we'd gone to get a sandwich at a service station, and then we both got back in the car and we said to each other, oh, we had a bit of thinking about that.
Yeah. I had thinking as well, and I didn't cross my mind for a minute that I might have an eating disorder. I just had thinking about it, and B was exactly the same. But interestingly, I also had thinking about B, who I knew was having thinking in the supermarket.
Do you know what? I'm going to be really bold and say something here, which is that we call this an eating disorder. And there's something in that, because whilst it absolutely looks to be about food, I would say it's about fear. Yeah. And if I ever get around to writing my own book, it'll probably be called something like Fear Not Food.
Yes. Because
it's not, this is, you know, and because we keep talking about eating disorders, food, you know, meal plans, which absolutely has its place. If we can understand this is about me feeling fearful that I'm not good enough in this world, that I cannot communicate, that people won't know that I exist, that people won't see that I'm special, that people won't know that I'm unique, that I won't know that, and that I won't feel any sense of control in this chaos. If people can say, well, that's what this is about, then that, I think that will absolutely change things. And then, of course, it's okay for you to have thinking about food and your body. You always will. You're alive.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Mary. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And I hope everyone watching has found it useful. We can put the link to Mary's website below, as well as some of the other things that you mentioned. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you so much, guys. Loved it. Take care.